Hello and welcome back to Ross Taylor Woodworks. This time I'm going to be making a folding table. This is a duplication of another project I did last year. The previous project I didn't film. The table I'm sitting at here is the project from last year. It came out so great I wanted to do a video of it. This was a table I picked out of the trash. It was in one of the picking videos. It was originally a shorter table, and I made a lightweight top for it and extended it to 8 feet, and it worked out so well. I'm going to do the same thing this year on one of the tables that I picked out in Glenburn Township, sitting right behind me here. This one's a 6-foot table. It's in a little bit disrepair. The top is kind of moldy and warped. So I'm going to do the same thing again this year, make this one into an 8-foot table. Now this is the table from last year. It was originally, I believe, a 5-foot table, and I made it into an 8-foot table. I'll flip it up and show you what I did. Now instead of just using a piece of 3/4 particle board, which is extremely heavy, I made a 1x6 pine frame with a 1/4-inch plywood skin on the top, and you can see here the 3/4-inch pine and then 1/4-inch skin on the top. It makes for a very lightweight top, so it reduces the weight of the table tremendously. The table is still very heavy to move around, but much lighter in weight than if it was a particle board top. And as I said, it was originally, I believe, a 5-foot table, and these are the original metal rails. And I cut the rails in half and extended them out so there was a gap in between the metal rails, and infilled that with a wood rail. And one issue I ran into with this, when I stood it up, it tended to sag in the middle. So I added a second wooden rail on the inside here that extends the full length of the table and acts as a stiffener, and that solved the sagging problem. And one of the cross rails of the 1x6 frame are right where the mounting hardware is. So I screwed the mounting hardware right into one of the cross rails. And I kept the legs in the same position as the original table, so it has the same overhang on the end here. And that worked out really well. Keeps the legs in from the end a little bit so they're not sticking out and less likely to trip on. Now let's look at the table I'm going to work on this time. The legs are a little different design, but it'll be the same concept and pretty much the same procedure. As you see, this rail has pulled away, and it's got these plastic corners. The center mount here mounts very similar to the other table, and you see the top is kind of moldy, and it's kind of warped on the top, so thought this was a good candidate to stretch into an 8-foot table. Now I'm going to weigh the table before I do anything with it. Now this has the original particle board top, and it comes in around 49 to 50 pounds. Okay, now I'm getting set up with the material I'm going to use. This is some 1x8 pine. It was part of a shipping crate that I found on the side of the road. Pieces of rough sawn 1x6 here. I'm going to mill them down into 1x6 pine. Alright, here's a quick sketch of the frame that I'm going to build. I'm going to have two 1x6s on the edge here. Once again, it's going to be 8 feet long. So we got two 1x6 8s on the side. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rails. This rail is going to be where the hardware mounts. One in the middle, And then the other one is where the other hardware mounts. And then on the end here, there's a 1x10. And the legs are going to mount to this rail here. So I'm going to go ahead and make up this frame. Now, before I take this table apart, I want to measure the existing table, the location of this mount, and the overhang. And I want that one rail right where this mount is going to be located. Okay, I've got my pieces milled up. Now I'm setting up to glue up the frame. And I've measured in 21 inches from the end. That's going to be the center of that rail. And then marked 5.5 inches, 2 3/4 on each side. So 5.5 inch rail. So that hardware will be located right in the middle of that rail. Then I'm going to locate another rail right in the middle. This is 48 inches to the center. And the same thing, a 5.5 inch rail centered right in the middle. Now there's no fancy joinery used here. I'm just going to butt join all the pieces together, putting some glue on the end of the boards, then clamping the frame together, making sure everything lines up. And making sure it's all square. Then after everything's clamped up, I want to spline the joints. Going to take the biscuit joiner and make some plunge cuts. And then just put some biscuits in the slots. Then I clamped it overnight. Now I'm going to cut off the excess biscuit. Sand all the joints smooth. And make sure all the sharp corners are rounded off. The original screws that held that mounting plate were kind of short, so I'm going to substitute with some longer screws. Okay, I've got the legs in place. Just a couple screws holding it temporarily. I'll add the other ones later. Now I've been making some wooden rails for the edges. The original table had these metal rails, but they're obviously too short. So I'm going to substitute a wooden rail for the original metal rail. It's 1 1/8 inch thick tulip poplar. And I've got a little rabbet on the end here to fit into this little pocket in the plastic corner. It's drilled and countersunk. So I'm going to screw it to the top. Now when I was test fitting this, I noticed that the legs were going to bump into the rail. So I took a little bit of material out on the belt sander right in this area, so that the legs can fold down. Now the next step is just to install these rails. Use some 2-inch screws. And just like the other table I did before, this wooden rail will act as a stiffener to keep the table from sagging in the middle. Now after flipping the table over, I'm going to scrape off the glue and sand everything smooth. Now I'm going to rip a 30-inch strip of 1/4-inch plywood. Apply some wood glue to all the rails and install the 1/4-inch plywood on the top. Then use some 3/4-inch brads to nail it in place. After gluing and nailing the top down, I went around and filled all the nail holes just with some spackle. Then all I have to do is sand the edges, round them over with the sander, and give the top a light sanding. Also at the Glenburn cleanup, I found this can of brown metallic paint. I'm going to use that to spray the bottom of the table just to seal up the wood. And this brown paint matches the legs really well, so spray the rails as well. Then I wipe down the top with some lacquer thinner just to tack off the dust. Now I'm just going to rub a coat of tung oil on the whole top just to seal it up. Okay, that'll close this one out. Not a very difficult project. Actually, this one was just a little bit easier than the one I did last year. Here I had to sand and paint the legs. The legs were extremely rusty, so I had to sand all the rust and prime and paint. I didn't have to do anything with the legs. The vast majority of this was salvaged materials. The only thing I had to buy was the sheet of plywood. And this is just a very inexpensive piece of underlayment material called sand ply. It's very similar to Luan mahogany. And once again, just put a coat of sealer on the top here. It could be anything. The one last year I put a coat of polyurethane on the top. Just using what I had on hand. This time was some tung oil. And just to seal it, and it doesn't matter what it really looks like. It's going to get covered with a tablecloth if we take it to an antique show or something. And it could even be an extra table for the shop here. There was another table along with this one in the Glenburn cleanup. That one was in good condition, nothing wrong with the top. So I just left that one alone. Might be handy to have a smaller table. I guess you're wondering how much does it weigh? The table before was about 50 pounds, 49 to 50 pounds. And I put this on the scale, and it was just a little bit under 40. So the table is 2 feet longer and weighs 10 pounds less. So it's definitely worth it to go through the extra effort to build this lightweight top.